Oh, I think maybe this one. Let's see. Okay. Mr. will read his paragraph, then I will translate. So it is called looking at the reasons for the failure of the United States in light of history. And which probably we provide a perspective from people who are not Americans. 所以这个题目的标题叫做结合历史看美国失败的原因。
我开始吗？
开始。
刚才几位朋友讲的很有意思，很有启发性。有些是我已经观察到的，有些是我还没有观察到的。
I'm very interested to listen to the previous speaker's talk because some of your statement is what I have observed as well, but some of your statement I have not thought of that. So thank you.
现在我谈谈从我的角度一些观察。
Now I'm going to talk about what I have observed.
美国开国几代前辈总是胜利，现在总是失败，和历史上古代王朝失败有许多相似之处，这里边似乎有些规律。究其原因如下。
The founding generations of the United States always win, but now they always fail. There are many similarities with the failure of ancient dynasties in history. Within, there seems to be some rules and reasons as follow.
第一点就是由于自身的强大有轻视别人的心态，会过高的估计自己或者过低的估计对手。中国古代也这样，朝廷议论危机时最常见的场景就是天朝如何先进强大，蛮族不足为虑，欠缺危机意识，所以经常错失良机，等到敌人强大后，比敌人寻找机会击败并亡国。
Because of its own strengths, it has a mentality of depreciating the others. This attitude will overestimate oneself and underestimate one's opponent. The same was true in ancient China. The most common thing when the emperor's court discussed a crisis was how advanced and powerful the emperor's country was, and they should not worry about those barbarian outsiders. Lack of crisis awareness so often that they miss the best opportunities. After the enemy got strong, it lost the opportunity to defeat, and the country perished.
第二条就是几代人都生活在温暖舒适的环境中，冒险精神缺失，绥靖主义上升，遇到危机只知道妥协退让，不想付出代价去争取。宋朝是最典型的例子，结果最终退无可退，亡国灭种。古代和现代都有一些人企图用说教和谈判来感化暴君和敌人，几乎没有听到有好的结果。
Generation of people have lived in a warm and comfortable environment. Thus, they lack the adventurous spirit and choose appeasement instead. When encountering a crisis, they only knew to compromise and to give up, and to discuss. They did not want to pay the price to fight. The Song dynasty in China was the most typical example. As a result, it finally retreated to where there was no way to retreat further, and the country was subjugated and people were slaughtered. There has been the theory about using preaching and negotiation to influence tyrants and foreign enemies in both the ancient and the modern times, and almost no good result have been heard.
第三点就是在对待伙伴和盟友的时候，喜欢培养听话和无能的人，排斥和敌视有能力、有威望、有独立人格的人。通俗的说法就是喜欢养走狗，不喜欢有独立人格的盟友。无论统治阶级和普通人都有这种出于人性弱点的倾向。
I see Carl is raising hand. Should I let you question or should we continue to finish? We have 6 points. I'll remember you, and then you raise question. We'll finish the speech.
That's okay. So please finish the presentation first.
Okay.
Carl,
So-
you have a burning question?
Well, we might save time simply by showing the slides and reading the English, since that's what's going to be done anyway. I don't know that we need to hear the Chinese, since none of us understand that except you.
OK OK，就是老魏，你打个招呼就说个标题就行了，你不要念中文了，直接按这个环节讲就行了。
Okay, that's all.
下边你就直接用。
All right. Okay, I'll use. So when dealing with the partners, the reason I used it is because I'm very sure this part of the seminar will be shown up to the Chinese side. Sometimes he got thousands of hits because he was there. So that's why I use a Chinese version. Okay, I'll just continue the English version. When dealing with the partners and allies, a country, I'm sorry, I just as well read them myself. A country on the decline prefer to cultivate obedient and incompetent people, and reject and be hostile, prestigious and independent personality. The popular saying is that such a country prefer to groom running dogs and dislike allies with independent personality. Both the ruling class and the ordinary people have this tendency due to human weakness. Number 4, I'm sorry.
你要翻一下。
Americans are very proud, unwilling to understand the national conditions of other countries, and like to measure and judge issues according to their own national standard. The mistakes caused by this attitude could be very big, and some low-level and huge mistakes were made. For example, the judgment of the Kuomintang government in China in the 1940s, and then the judgment of the Chinese communist regime in modern days. The judgment of some Muslim governments in modern times have caused those countries to regress or lose people who could be Americans' friends. Number 5, due to excessive protection, the government of those protected countries is no longer the government that bears full responsibility. Because of their own bureaucracy, the Americans did not seriously monitor and restrict those governments. Those foreign governments naturally tend to ignore the interests of their own country and their people, and only cared about satisfying the interests of private individuals and small groups. Corruption of all kinds accelerated, and people in those countries renounced such kind of government, and officials were irresponsible because they do not have a sense of a crisis. Iraq and Afghanistan are the typical example for this. The opposition examples are Israel and Taiwan, where everyone knows that if they do not work hard and are not responsible, their country will perish. So there is no need for the full protection of the United States, and they will not be as vulnerable as Afghanistan. Number 6, the American electoral system makes it easier for obedient and incompetent leaders to come to power. The capitalists control politics. Thus, the politics is no more of all the people. Politicians without military knowledge commanded the military, which caused the sudden collapse of Afghan military. Being accustomed to play games but not fully understand the military strategy is one of the reasons. Of course, the above mentioned are only the main and the key reasons, not all of them. Otherwise, we will need tens of thousands of words for every story to be all encompassing. Thank you.
For those of you who are not familiar with Mr. Wei, he was the first person individually challenged Deng Xiaoping's policy in 1979. He was put in jail for several times, totally more than 18 years. And after he was released from the jail, he was put on an airplane as directly sent into the United States as a bargaining chip, so that American government can play compromise with the Communist Party. So, and after that, he had involved with a lot of high-rank American politicians. So his perspective is pretty unique. Now, I believe you have tons of questions that you would like to ask him directly. This is a good chance. Please.
Yes, in your last slide, you said that capitalists control politics. I'm not sure that's a very productive way of looking at it, because capitalists are on all sides of the political spectrum. You have capitalists who put the Biden regime into power, and you have capitalists who support Trump. I'm not sure that looking at capitalists as a generality is very productive. I think we should look more at the elites and their ideologies, which differ from one another.
Answer.
You're muted.
Muted.
We will respond to you.
一个国家的利益呢，不仅仅是资本家的利益，但是现在美国的选举制度和美国的政治啊，把这个就是使得资本家，就是有钱的人对政治的影响力远远大于全国老百姓的影响力，这是一种很大的偏差。
Capitalist is not the only kind of people in a democratic country. But now the capitalists, especially Wall Street, has much more influence than average voters. And I see that as a huge deviation from what a democratic system should be.
比如说，在这个中国，美国对中国这个贸易问题上，美国资本家的利益远远大于美国普通老百姓的利益。那么，20多年以来造成的后果，现在大家可以看得很清楚了。
A very good example in front of you is that in regarding trade with Americans trade with China, you would see the Wall Street, the big business has much more influence than to the politicians and to American than the average Americans. And if you see how Red China rises in the past 20-some years because of this bias, then you really see the effect even in front of you.
而且不仅仅是美国的资本家在中国赚到了钱，他们在中国也受到了中国政府的严厉的控制，因为中国政府是一个不讲究法律的政府。那么现在他们就变成了中国政府影响美国政府的工具。
The consequence is not only that those American business made a lot of money in China, but also that they were controlled by the Chinese government, influenced by the Chinese government. And then in return, they influence the American government. So yeah, nowadays you see how the American government was influenced by the Chinese government.
这种情况继续下去，恐怕成为美国衰落、美国衰败的一个最主要的、最大的弱点。
And so therefore, those Wall Street and the capitalists become the tools of Chinese government nowadays. If this situation allowed to be continued, I see this as the biggest element to make American decline.
Amanda, you have a question in the chat box?
I was just reflecting on the comment that it's not so much capitalists on one side or another of the US debate, it's capitalists capitalism as a principle that is considered above and beyond the common good for the people here or in Afghanistan or other benefits. And I think that's a well-held point, and I see it in the Chinese history as well as the US, as well as the Roman and the Greek. So.
Do you have a question? Want Ms. Wei comment?
So my question is, given the current patterns that we have, the current situation, what are our options for strategic action that shifts the direction?
我想有很多的美国政治家早就看到了这些问题，他们也想改变，但是要改变一个传统是非常难的事情。
I think a lot of American politicians already noticed this, but they knew they want to change as well. But however, it is very difficult to change a tradition.
包括控制媒体，包括政治捐款，包括官员卸任以后的经济利益等等问题，使得美国的政治越来越倾向于大企业、大资本。 而不是照顾国家的利益。
I see American politics is more and more lean in favor of the big capitals instead of its own national interests and the interests of the people. And you could see this through the election, the campaign, the politicians' campaign for donation needed from the business. And then after they become politicians, they need to speak in their favor.
最大的困难就是说，能够有权利改变这些事情，改变这些事情的这些政治圈的人，他们也是得到利益的人，所以很难让他们来改变他们得到的利益。
The biggest difficulty is it's a vicious circle. Because those people get elected, they are also beneficiary of those money. And then it will be difficult for them to go beyond those money to speak for what they really knew.
这是你们美国人的困难，得要你们自己美国人自己想办法解决。
I really think that's a big difficulty for your American system, and you need to find some way to solve this issue of how the money influences your politics.
God, okay.
It was Vladimir Lenin who once so aptly said that the capitalists will sell us the rope that we will use to hang them.
说资本主义什么是
制造一个绞死他们的。
哎，对，very good, very good.
列宁的这句话很著名。现在也经常被很多的中国人来引用。
Lenin's this quote is often be quoted by Chinese.
因为列宁和其他的马克思主义者，他们从很早就看到了这个资本主义民主制的一个这些根本的缺陷，但是这么多年以来，100多年以来，这个状况没有根本的改变。
That's because Lenin and other followers of Karl Marxism, they have noticed this fatal fault of the democratic system under the capitalist. And it's more than 100 years, it's still nothing really changed. So in that way, he is correct.
但是问题就在于资本家并不在乎绞索，他们只在乎他们现在能赚多少钱。
But unfortunately, those capitalists, they don't really care about the deaths ahead of them. They only care about make money right now.
Okay. Any more questions? Glenda, you want to say something? You're muted.
Just to say, it's a perfect example of the way that a pattern gets formed in a complex system and then replicates itself over time in the iteration of self-organizing. And breaking out of it is not an easy step. especially in situations as we're living in them now. So just thank you.
Okay, so any more questions? If not, we do a last presentation, which is
he wants to make a additional comment.
我觉得要改变这个现状，需要更多的美国人来关注这个问题。那么你们这些知识分子就成为这个社会中最重要的一部分。你们可以看到问题，你们并不是资本家养活的人。那么你们应该警告所有的美国人，让他们明白这个困难在什么地方，然后才能去解决。如果大多数普通的美国人不理解的话，这个问题永远不会解决。
I think this is come to the very important situation when all your intellectuals are as the elite and people who are not as much influenced by those money, like those politicians. You as the elite of the country, you see the problems. It's you raw and you capacity to tell the Americans what's really happened, and in an effort to awaken them and to tell them to move on for some change. I think you guys are very important.
我觉得你们这些知识分子应该起来发起一场运动，来让公众都关注这个问题。现在呢，这个机会挺好，包括这次选举，包括阿富汗的问题，包括很多美国经济上的困难，都集中在这个根本的问题上了。就是怎么样让政治家们关注整个美国利益，而不是仅仅关注资本家的利益。
I think it is quite a good time for your intellectuals to start action now, because right now you see several issues with such a background. You guys in the right position to move in regard not only Afghanistan issue, but also the election problem, as well as the how to stop the influence of the capitalists to the politicians. Not that they, since we already talked about, they are in this whirlpool and could not get out themselves. You may be able to help them, give out your hands to drag them out, or at least to point to the others the problem and try the whole society try to move on together to solve this issue, at least to give a push.
我在网络上看到很多的中国人在评论，说为什么美国的选举制度都选举出一些智力不高的、很平庸的美国呢？这是你们美国自己的问题了，你们应该深刻的思考。
Even on the Chinese forums, I saw many internet users were commenting, see why America, such a great country, elected such average leaders for themselves and not the smartest, not the strongest to lead this country. And I think that is the problem of you guys. And maybe it has come to the point you should think and to correct.
That's why, Carl, that's why we're
just a word about capitalism. It's actually, it's a two-edged sword. Because on the one hand, as you say, the capitalists, as Lenin said, would sell us the rope to that we used to hang them. And so the capitalists are weak in confronting opposing ideologies. On the other hand, capitalism is a system that has provided more wealth and more benefits and freedom for more people in the world than any other system has. And so you've got to weigh the one, excuse me, the benefits against the costs of capitalism. And capitalism is very attractive to the people who actually benefit from it. And that's the vast majority of people. Of course, that does not prevent the weakness of capitalism in the face of non-capitalist ideologies.
我完全同意你的观点。
I'm totally agree with you.
但是我的说法是这样的，资本家作为一个美国人，他生活在美国，那么他对美国内部的事物的看法和大众的看法比较接近。
But here's my observation for an American capitalist who lives in United States. His observation and the opinions of American politics may relatively close to average Americans.
但是作为任何资本家，他们都不喜欢这个像工人运动啊、社会福利啊、国家征税啊这些行为，他们都认为这是减少了他们的财富。
But as a nature of the capitalist, of course, they do not like social welfare, the benefits for their workers, as well as tax by the government, because those will not be good for their money-making process.
在这种情况下，那些专制的国家，不仅是中国，包括什么埃及啊等等这些国家，能够给他们提供依靠专制的政治，能够给他们提供非常廉价的劳动力，在这个时候，他们就比较喜欢这些专制政权了。
But to the outside, it is a different story. To those dictatorial governments, including especially China, and they like those systems because they could provide cheap labor. They could provide the sense they wanted that they cannot have in their own democratic country.
在这种情况下，这些资本家就受到自己良心的拷问了：你是最爱钱，还是热爱你自己的自由的民主的生活？那么有一部分资本家就会全力去支持中国共产党的政府，来让他们有机会赚超额的利润。
So now you're talking about the way we were talking at the beginning of the seminar by Stud of the two ethnic system. Do you prefer money, money only? Therefore, you love those dictatorial government to help you make excessive money, or you do have some conscious of some other value. So here I see some of those capitalists love those dictatorial governments to make their money.
这些人具有双重的人格，他们在美国，他们喜欢美国的民主和自由，但是呢，他们在中国赚钱，他们就成为中国政府影响美国政策的工具。
And you see those people, they have dual personalities. On one side, they live in United States. They love America and its freedom and democracy. On the other side, they want to make money. They love the Chinese government to help them to make money through cheap labor or whatever, abuse the human rights. And therefore, they become the lobbyists for the Chinese government to lobby the American politicians.
我们现在可以看到这种影响力非常强大。白宫的一些官员都在替中国政府游说，为什么？他们在拿资本家的钱。
And you in Washington D.C., you see such enormous influence of Chinese government to American government, including officials of White House. They would make money. They would lobby for the Chinese government on Chinese government behalf for the items that is good for the Chinese government, but not even necessarily good for the United States.
Oh, Glenda?
So I think we have a really great example of one of the characteristics of a complex system, and that is that they sit on top of deep paradoxes where there's a tension about two different directions, even a tension between the two ethics. There are benefits on both ends and risks on both ends, and that our possibility for thriving is to find the place in between in any given moment that's most fit for function. And so for us to carry the question, recognizing the strengths and benefits of both ends of the continuum, and to find consciously and through dialogue what is possible in between, because certainty at either end is just as destructive as certainty at the other end. And so I love that this conversation is holding that tension between the two.
More comments? You have unmute.
for Americans, you want to avoid the conflict and hoping to find a point that you could compromise.
No, not looking for I think that is an American way of looking for certainty at a compromise point. What I'm proposing is that there's a dynamic interplay between the two possibilities, rather than a single point of solution, an interplay over time.
但是中国政府的终极的观点就是我把你吃掉，我现在吃不掉你，但是我隐藏起来，我再继续我得到很多的利益，等我强大起来以后，像现在的习近平这样，他觉得自己已经足够强大了，那么他就要吃掉你。
But the strategy of the Chinese Communist regime it has always been very clear. It's that they want to rule over the whole world, would destroy United States. It's only now with Xi Jinping who thought he's already big enough with the help of the United States of the blood fusion. So he become the wolf warrior to carry out an assault right now.
他们的思维习惯就是，你如果不能屈服于我，那么我就要使用战争手段来打击你。
And their thoughts is that if you do not surround to me, I will strike you with war.
那么在这种情况下，如何取得平衡呢？这个是一个很大的话题，我们以后再讨论。
So how to reach a balance under this circumstance? It's a big topic. We could go expand further in the future.
总之，你们大家应该告诉美国人，你不要幻想共产党和你美国人是一样的。
To summarize, you need your intellectuals should talk to Americans to let them know that do not keep false hope to the communist regime in China and do not be fooled by their lies.
就像一个正常人和流氓之间没有共同的思维习惯。
You should realize a gentleman and a hooligan in between, that was not a very good common language to share in that sense.
Jamie, you raise your hand?
Yes. Yeah. So my comment is about to Glenda and WEI Jingsheng at the same time to your presentation. Glenda, so you say the tension of the paradox is the life of complexity, certainty on either side is only short-term success. I'm experimenting with a paradigm in which you need to name the problem. And what I had a little bit trouble, this one half of me admired your presentation, admires your responses, and I'm learning from you. But the other half of me sees, I just hear someone describing things in such a general term that they can mean everything that we as an audience want them to mean. And so we all feel happy because you're telling something that we already agree with. And so you never really get to what is the real problem. And so I think, for instance, to give an example, the last presentation very clearly kind of showed the problem in a language that is said we're all thinking about ourselves and we're not really looking at the world at large and how we interact with that world. And we can be more specific and say this is a human problem. So that's not a complex system. No, it's humans and how they think about their relation with the world. So now I'm even more specific. It's about how we think about how we interact with the world. And so I'm wondering, why is complexity science not more specific in saying we're dealing with human interactions and miscommunication between humans, and yes, the language will never be perfect, but instead of calling it uncertainty and paradox, why not just say we need to learn to listen and communicate better, and we need to really think about our interactions?
Can you rephrase your question in just one simple sentence?
Well, what I said, why can the language not be, instead of a complex adapting system, why not just say human interactions, that humans need to think more about how they interact with other humans and the consequences of their human interactions, and specifically of how they communicate, and make their communications more concrete.
I still have a very long question. Glenda, you want to have a try?
Sorry, I didn't.
Sorry, I
Jason,
didn't understand you, Jason.
No, I mean, Jamie put a very long question. So you want to try to give an answer?
So I have a short answer, and it is, how's that working for us?
Well,
So we have for a very long time exhorted people to get along better, to listen to each other, to tell stories, to build institutions that keep us happy and connected, and that's a pathway that isn't wrong. It just has proved not to be very useful. And if we can see the mechanics of a complex adaptive system as an explanation for our bad acting, then possibly there are pathways for action that will prove more effective in touching the mechanisms. And I don't know that that's true, but it's pretty specific to say human beings seek for certainty and control, and that gets us in trouble. Which is, I think, the center. So that's what I want to do, not to say that relationships are not key. It's just, how can we talk about relationships in a way that's both true and useful?
Jamie, you can work on that.